The Salisbury Plain sits silent under the vast and open sky of southern England. Ancient grasses whisper secrets to those who dare to listen closely to the wind. In the center of this desolate landscape stands a circle of heavy gray stones known to the world as Stonehenge. They are not merely rocks arranged by primitive hands, but markers of a deep and terrifying power. For centuries, travelers have looked upon them with awe, but few understand the hunger that resides within the soil beneath. This is not a place of peace or simple worship. It is a hunting ground where the veil between worlds is dangerously thin. When the fog rolls in and the moon is obscured by thick clouds, the stones seem to move on their own accord. Many visitors come to Wiltshire expecting a spiritual awakening or a connection to the ancestors of the British Isles. They touch the cold, rough surface of the Sarsens and feel a vibration that rattles their very bones. But there are stories that the tourist boards do not print in their glossy brochures. These are the whispers of the locals who live in the shadow of the monument. They speak of the people who walked into the circle and never walked out. The official records might label them as runaways or tragic accidents, but the truth is far more sinister. The missing person cases around Stonehenge are numerous and defy all logical explanation known to modern science. The stones keep their counsel, and the land holds onto its victims with a jealous grip. To understand the darkness that clings to Stonehenge, one must look back at the history of the site. It was constructed over thousands of years by a people who left no written records of their intentions. We assume they built it for the sun or the moon or the changing of the seasons. However, there are older legends that suggest a more defensive purpose. Some believe the stones were erected not to honor a god, but to imprison something else, a barrier of consecrated earth and rock designed to hold back a force that resided in the chalk beneath the plain. Over time, the original purpose was forgotten, but the energy remained. It lies dormant, waiting for the right conditions to wake and feed upon the living souls foolish enough to trespass. The most chilling of these disappearances centers around a legend from the late summer of August in the year 1971. It was a time of cultural shift and exploration, when young people sought ancient wisdom in the countryside. A group of 5 friends, famously known in local lore as the hippie convoy, decided to make camp within the stone circle itself. At that time, security was far more lax than it is today, and access to the stones was relatively unrestricted. They pitched their tents in the center of the circle, hoping to absorb the vibrations of the monument. They were seeking enlightenment and a connection to the druidic past, but they found something else entirely. Their story serves as a grim warning to anyone who disrespects the old boundaries. The group consisted of 3 young men and 2 young women, all from London, and eager for adventure. They carried acoustic guitars and bottles of wine and bedrolls to sleep upon the earth. The afternoon was warm, and the sky was a brilliant blue without a hint of the terror to come. Locals in the nearby village of Amesbury recall seeing the group passing through. They were laughing and singing, and full of the vibrancy of youth. One shopkeeper remembered warning them about the storms that were forecast for the evening. The Salisbury Plain is known for its sudden weather changes, where the sky can turn black in mere minutes. The group laughed off the warning, believing that nature was their ally and not their enemy. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the atmosphere around the stones underwent a subtle shift. The birds that usually sang in the surrounding fields fell completely silent. The air grew heavy and thick with an electrical charge that made the hair on their arms stand up. One of the campers, named Thomas, reported feeling a sudden drop in temperature. It was August, yet he could see his breath misting in the twilight air. The jovial mood of the group began to evaporate as a sense of unease settled over the camp. They lit a small fire in the center of the circle, trying to push back the creeping shadows. But the fire sputtered and hissed, as if the wood itself refused to burn properly in that cursed place. Night fell completely, and the darkness across the plain was absolute. There were no streetlights or city glow to illuminate the horizon. The only light came from the stars above, until the clouds began to roll in. These were not normal storm clouds, but towering pillars of blackness that seemed to descend from the heavens. The wind picked up, howling through the gaps in the standing stones. The sound was like a mournful cry or a warning scream from the earth itself. The campers retreated into their tents, seeking shelter from the rising gale. They zipped the canvas shut, but they could not shut out the feeling that they were being watched by eyes that were not human. A police constable was on patrol that night, driving his vehicle along the nearby road. His name was Officer Wilcock, and he was a man of practical mind and steady nerves. He knew the area well and often checked on the monument to ensure no vandals were defacing the stones. As he approached the site, he noticed a strange glow emanating from the center of the circle. It was not the warm orange of a campfire, but a cold and pulsating blue light. He slowed his car and squinted through the windshield, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The light was intense and seemed to originate from the ground itself, rising up to engulf the massive sarsen stones. Inside the tents, the 5 friends were in a state of absolute panic. The air pressure dropped so drastically that their ears popped painfully. The static electricity in the air became so intense that sparks flew from their fingertips when they touched the metal poles of the tent. One of the women, named Sarah, began to scream that the stones were glowing. She looked out through the flap and saw the massive rocks illuminated from within. They were not reflecting light, they were generating it. The blue luminescence cast long and impossible shadows that seemed to dance and writhe on the grass. The fear in the camp transformed into a primal terror as they realized they were trapped in the center of a supernatural event. The storm broke with a violence that shook the ground. Lightning did not strike from the sky down to the earth, but seemed to arc between the stones themselves. Bolts of blue-white energy connected the monoliths, creating a cage of electricity. Officer Wilcock stopped his car and stepped out into the rain. He watched in disbelief as the stone circle became a blinding beacon of light. He could hear the screams of the campers over the roar of the wind. They were screams of agony and mortal fear, the kind of sound that haunts a man for the rest of his days. He started to run toward the monument, his duty compelling him to help despite every instinct telling him to flee. The lightning strikes intensified, hitting the center of the circle repeatedly. The blue light became so bright that Officer Wilcock had to shield his eyes with his arm. He could see the silhouettes of the campers through the canvas of their tents. They were thrashing wildly, as if fighting off invisible attackers. Then one by one, the silhouettes vanished. It was not that they fell or ran away, it was as if they simply dissolved into the light. The screaming reached a crescendo, and then was suddenly cut off. The silence that followed was more deafening than the thunder. The blue light faded instantly, leaving the stones standing dark and silent against the stormy sky. Officer Wilcock reached the center of the circle breathless and soaked to the bone. He shone his flashlight around the area, expecting to find bodies or injured people. What he found defied all explanation. The tents were shredded and collapsed, as if a giant hand had crushed them. The campfire was scattered and cold. There were personal belongings strewn everywhere, including a guitar with broken strings and a backpack torn open. But of the 5 young people, there was no sign. There were no footprints leading away from the circle in the muddy ground. It was as if they had been plucked from the face of the earth by the storm itself. The police officer called for backup, and a search was organized immediately. Men with dogs and flashlights scoured the Salisbury Plain for miles around. They checked every ditch and grove of trees. They called out the names of the missing campers into the darkness. But the only answer was the wind. The dogs refused to enter the stone circle, whimpering and pulling at their leashes. They sensed the residue of the energy that had been unleashed there, and they wanted no part of it. The search continued for days, but not a single trace of the bodies was ever found. No clothing, no remains, nothing. The investigation that followed was fraught with confusion and unanswered questions. The official report stated that the campers likely fled during the storm and were lost in the wilderness or hitchhiked away. But Officer Wilcock knew what he had seen. He knew they had not run away. He had watched the light swallow them whole. His report mentioned the blue light and the arcing electricity, but it was quietly filed away and ignored by his superiors. The authorities did not want to encourage rumors of supernatural activity at a national landmark. They preferred the narrative of reckless youth running off to start new lives elsewhere. Years passed, and the legend of the 1971 disappearance became a ghost story told around campfires. But for the families of the missing, it was a never-ending nightmare. They hired private investigators and psychics to try and locate their loved ones. Some psychics who visited the site claimed they could hear the screams of the campers, trapped in an echo of time. They said the stones acted as a battery, storing the energy of the storm and opening a doorway to another place, a place that was cold and dark, and from which there was no return. The parents eventually passed away without ever knowing the truth of what happened to their children that August night. This was not the first time people had vanished near the stones, nor would it be the last. In the late 19th century, a farm laborer named William vanished in similar circumstances. He had been walking home across the plain near the stones when a sudden mist descended. His wife, watching from their cottage doorway, saw him enter the mist, but never saw him emerge. Neighbors searched the fields for days. They found his hat lying near the heel stone, but William himself was gone. The locals whispered that the fairies had taken him, but the older folk knew better. They knew the stones had claimed another soul to keep the power fed. Geologists and physicists have studied Stonehenge for decades, trying to unlock its secrets. They have discovered that the stones are positioned on powerful ley lines, which are currents of energy that run through the earth. Some researchers believe that under certain conditions, such as a severe magnetic storm, these ley lines can fluctuate wildly. This fluctuation could theoretically create anomalies in the magnetic field. While science stops short of calling them portals, the theoretical possibility of dimensional instability is a concept that fringes on the edge of quantum physics. The ancients may have understood this science better than we do today. There are also accounts from the construction of the nearby roads in the mid-20th century. Workers reported tools going missing and strange figures watching them from the stone circle at night. One night, watchman quit his job after claiming that a tall figure in robes walked through the barbed wire fence without cutting it. He said the figure approached the stones and seemed to merge with the rock. The next morning, the workers found deep scorch marks on the grass where the figure had stood. The engineers blamed lightning, but there had been no storm that night. The incident was hushed up to avoid delaying the road construction. In more recent times, campers and tourists still report unsettling phenomena. Many digital cameras malfunction when brought into the inner circle during special access tour. Batteries drain instantly and files become corrupted. Some visitors report feeling a sudden wave of nausea or dizziness when standing near the altar stone. It is as if the biological magnetism of the human body is reacting to a massive external field. There are also reports of time distortion, people who believe they have spent only a few minutes in the circle, check their watches to find that hours have passed. This missing time is a classic symptom of alien abduction and paranormal encounters. A particularly disturbing case occurred in the late 1990s involving a solo backpacker named Julian. He was trekking across England and decided to sleep illegally near the stones to save money. He recorded an audio diary of his journey. The tape was found later by a dog walker near the fence line. On the recording, Julian describes a humming sound that started low and grew louder until it vibrated in his teeth. He speaks of a shadow detaching itself from the stones and moving toward him. The last minute of the tape is filled with the sound of static and a low, guttural voice speaking a language that linguists could not identify. Julian was never seen again. The audio tape was analyzed by experts who tried to filter out the static. The voice on the recording did not sound human. It had a frequency range that was lower than the human vocal cords can produce. Some suggested it was wind rushing through the stones, but the cadence was rhythmic and deliberate. It sounded like a chant or an incantation. The police dismissed the tape as a prank, but the dog walker who found it claimed it was warm to the touch, as if it had just been dropped. The disappearance of Julian remains an open case on the police files, labeled simply as missing under suspicious circumstances. The Druids who worship at Stonehenge today claim to respect the spirits of the place. They perform rituals to balance the energies and honor the ancestors. However, even among the modern pagan community, there is a wary respect for the site. They know that the circle is not always benevolent. During the winter solstice, when the nights are longest, the energy at the stones feels predatory. Experienced practitioners advise against staying in the circle alone after midnight. They speak of the gray lady's shadowy figures seen drifting between the megaliths, who try to lure the living into the darkness. Skeptics argue that the vast open nature of Salisbury Plain makes it easy for people to get lost or succumb to hypothermia. They say the disappearances are just tragic accidents amplified by the spooky reputation of the monument. They point to the fact that thousands of people visit every year without incident, but the skeptics cannot explain the lack of bodies. In a landscape of short grass and chalk, finding a deceased person should be relatively easy for search teams. The fact that so many vanish without a trace suggests that they are not on the plain at all. They have gone somewhere else. One theory proposes that the specific arrangement of the bluestones, which were transported from Wales, creates a harmonic resonance. When the wind hits the stones at the right angle and velocity, it produces a sound wave that affects the human brain. This infrasound can cause hallucinations and feelings of dread. It is possible that the missing people entered a state of psychosis induced by this sound and wandered off in a fugue state. They may have fallen into hidden sinkholes or ancient mine shafts that dot the landscape. But this does not explain the blue light or the scorched earth often found at the scenes. The connection to the military is another layer of the mystery. The Salisbury Plain is largely owned by the Ministry of Defense and used for training. There are rumors of underground bunkers and secret experiments conducted near the ancient sites. Conspiracy theorists suggest that the military is aware of the energy anomalies at Stonehenge and has been studying them for decades. Some even claim that the missing people were abducted by military personnel for experimentation. While this sounds like fiction, the proximity of heavy military activity to the site of so many disappearances keeps the theory alive. Let us return to the aftermath of the 1971 incident. The parents of the missing girl, Sarah, received a letter 3 years after she vanished. The envelope had no return address, and the postmark was illegible. Inside was a single pressed flower, a species of orchid that had been extinct in England for over a century. There was no note. The flower was analyzed and confirmed to be genuine. How could a missing girl send a flower that no longer existed from a place that could not be found? It was a final, cruel twist in a story that offered no closure, only more impossible questions. The psychological toll on the witnesses is also a key part of the Stonehenge curse. Officer Wilcock, the policeman who witnessed the event, left the force shortly after. He became a recluse, living in a small cottage far away from Wiltshire. He refused to speak to journalists, but his neighbors said he kept all the lights on in his house at night. He was terrified of the dark and of thunderstorms. He died alone, an old man tormented by the memory of the blue light and the screams of the youth he could not save. His journals, discovered after his death, detailed his nightmares of the stones walking like giants across the land. There are those who believe that Stonehenge is a locking mechanism for the earth itself. If the stones are disturbed, or if the ritual alignment is broken, chaos is unleashed. The missing people may be the price required to keep the lock secure, a blood sacrifice demanded by the ancient guardians to ensure the stability of the barrier. In this view, the campers and travelers are not victims of malice, but fuel for a machine that has been running for 5,000 years. It is a cold and utilitarian perspective that makes the loss of human life seem insignificant in the face of cosmic necessity. Modern technology has done little to solve the mystery. Drones flying over the site have captured thermal anomalies that vanish when investigated. Ghost hunters with EVP recorders have captured voices saying names that correspond to the missing. The more we probe the site with our gadgets, the more the site seems to push back. It is as if the stones are aware of our scrutiny and are mocking our feeble attempts to understand them. The mystery is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be feared and respected from a distance. The warning remains clear for anyone visiting the Salisbury Plain. Admire the stones from behind the rope barriers. Take your photos and buy your souvenirs. But do not linger after the sun goes down. Do not try to commune with forces you do not understand. And if you hear a humming sound or see a blue light gathering at the base of the Sarson's Run, run as fast as you can toward the light of the modern world. Because if the stones take notice of you, there will be no police rescue and no search party that can find you. The disappearances continue to happen sporadically. A tourist separated from their group, a local teenager on a dare. They are just statistics in a police database until you connect the dots. The timeline of loss stretches back to the Bronze Age and reaches forward into our present day. Stonehenge stands as a tombstone for the missing, a monument to the unknown fate that befell them. It is a beautiful enigma by day, but by night it is a gaping maw waiting for the next curious soul to step inside. As you drive past the monument on the highway, look closely at the spaces between the stones. You might see a shadow that does not belong. You might see the flicker of a campfire that isn't there. The spirits of the lost are trapped in the silica of the rocks, forever bound to the place of their demise. They are the silent witnesses to the power of the circle. They scream without sound and reach out with invisible hands, begging for release. But the stones do not let go. They never let go. The legacy of Stonehenge is not just one of architectural triumph, but of enduring horror. It reminds us that there are corners of this earth where human dominion does not apply. We build our cities and our roads, and we think we have tamed the wild. But in the shadow of the great trilithons, we are reminded of our insignificance. We are fleeting, temporary creatures walking on land that remembers everything. The missing people are part of that memory, now preserved forever in the cold, hard quartz. So when the wind howls across the Salisbury Plain and the rain lashes against your window, think of those who were caught in the storm. Think of the 5 friends in 1971 who sought peace and found oblivion. Think of the blue light that defies physics and the silence that follows the scream. The stones are still there. They are still hungry, and they are waiting for the next storm to break. The dread that lingers after hearing these stories is the realization that we are not safe, not even in our modern world of cell phones and satellite tracking. There are holes in reality where a person can slip through and be lost forever. Stonehenge is one of those holes. It is a scar on the landscape that refuses to heal, a permanent reminder that the dark is not empty. It is full of things that want to take us away.